Well, friends, Christmas came early this year, and its name was Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. No, never again. I'm just kidding. Today we're talking about Spider-Man No Way Home. But first, welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees. Okay, friends. Like so many others out there, I braved the movie theaters this weekend, and I saw Spider-Man No Way Home. And again, please forgive the Christmas decor. I'm shooting more non-Christmas videos this December than I am Christmas videos. Almost like I put up these decorations for nothing. Oh well. So today we're talking about one of the biggest holiday blockbusters, if not one of the biggest blockbusters of the year. I would almost say the decade, maybe the century, maybe our lifetimes. This Spider-Man film is a big deal. And I'm a casual Marvel fan. I'm an even more casual Spider-Man fan, but still, my mind was blown at how good this film was. And so, I'm going to talk about it. And if it wasn't already blatantly obvious, this video is going to be filled with a ton of spoilers. Nothing is sacred. Everything is on the table. So if you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home, you have been warned. Okay, moving on. I was only half kidding when I said that this might be one of the biggest films of the decade, if not the century. I know we're only like, a fifth of the way into the century, but there's something so incredibly unique about this movie. Obviously, it's not one of those pretentious Oscar films, one of those movies that for years to come, people will look back on and say, oh yes, this has influenced the path of cinema. But I do think that there is something to be said for having a cinematic experience like this. A cinematic experience that has been informed by 20 years worth of films from completely different franchises, all bringing together the mythology surrounding these characters. That's something, to my knowledge, that has never happened before, and that was definitely the biggest selling point about this film. Bringing together all the characters from the Toby Maguire universe, the Andrew Garfield universe, and now weaving them into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So just to clarify, I'm not saying that this movie is good purely because they pulled off an epic historical crossover, unlike anything we've seen in film before. Yes, that was cool. But what made it good, as opposed to just cool, was the way they actually used the characters. They acknowledged that all of the people that we were meeting for the first time in the MCU had fully fleshed out lives, they had their own stories, they had made their own choices that the movie knew most of us watching had already seen play out in previous films. And it just fed dramatically into this theme of everyone deserving a second chance so beautifully. And that's just one example of why I think the MCU is such a unique, magical feat of filmmaking. Now, I know there are some people who think of themselves as Martin Scorsese, who believe that the MCU is just a massive waste of time and money, and it just, basically capitalism as a movie franchise. And I can see that, and maybe I agree a little bit, but I do also see the payoff. And the payoff is what we saw in Spider-Man No Way Home. Like I said, you have all these past films to develop these characters, and then you can delve right into exploring them to their limits in movies like this. And all of that aside, the movie is just cool because it's peppered in with so many Easter eggs and so many call-outs and basically moments of fan service that are acknowledging and celebrating 20 years of Spider-Man films. So for today's video, I just wanted to go through a list of my 10 favorite moments of, I don't know if I would classify them as Easter eggs or moments of fan service, but they're 10 moments that I personally really liked. So I'm going to talk about those and kind of use them as talking points for my review of the film overall. Okay, here we go. Number 10, Willem Defoe as Norman Osborn saying,
"You know, I'm something of a scientist myself."
Of course, that is probably one of the most quotable, dare I say most famous lines from Sam Raimi's original film from, I think, 2002. It's become one of the most widespread memes in internet culture, and I just love that him saying that line in this film was pretty well just Marvel giving the fans exactly what they wanted. You don't bring Willem Defoe as the Green Goblin back into the fold without acknowledging the place that he has made for himself in our popular culture. And aside from just the meme-worthy factor, Willem Defoe in this movie is an absolute standout. I think the thing that is so special about the MCU and really Marvel films in general, going all the way back to the Sam Raimi franchise, is how they bring in top tier actors to play these comic book characters. It's kind of like what we saw with WandaVision. On paper, the premise sounds absolutely ridiculous, but when you bring the best actors that you possibly can and have them inhabit the roles, all of a sudden, you look past how ridiculous these characters are and you see them for people. And Willem Defoe's performance as Norman/Green Goblin in this movie is both tragic and terrifying. He had moments where just my heart was breaking for him, counteracted with moments where he absolutely terrified me, and that's the balance that you need to make characters like this work in films like this. And he was incredible. Number 9, the appearance of Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. I'm gonna admit, I have never seen Daredevil. I only know Daredevil by reputation because Netflix kept trying to push it on me on my home feed and I kept on ignoring it. But as of this week, I guess I have to watch Daredevil. Because, also, spoiler alert, incoming for the latest episode of Hawkeye. You've been warned. What really blew my mind was that not only did we get a Matt Murdock cameo in No Way Home, it occurred the exact same week that Kingpin arrived in Hawkeye. A week ago, those names, Matt Murdock and Kingpin, they meant absolutely nothing to me. I had to do the research to figure out who they were. But again, that's what I love about the MCU. In the past week, I've been introduced to these two characters, Daredevil as well as Kingpin. I have little to no idea who they are, but there's an entire series where I can go and learn who they are. It's like being a comic book fan, but with less commitment of having to read things. And the thing that really blew my mind was just the synergy between No Way Home and the latest episode of Hawkeye. Now, as time goes on, no one's really going to connect the dots or care that they were released during the same week. But to be alive, watching Marvel content during this week, it was amazing because not only did I have 2 Daredevil references, there was also this great moment in the latest episode of Hawkeye where Kate Bishop says, "Oh, you should go see the brand new Statue of Liberty." I thought, what happened to the Statue of Liberty? I feel like I'm fairly up to date with Marvel things, and I don't think they've ever acknowledged what's happened to the Statue of Liberty. Then all of a sudden, the big third act battle in No Way Home takes place on the Statue of Liberty, who is now holding Cap's shield. Number 8, the Tom Hardy Venom post-credit scene. Oh no, sorry, it was the mid-credit scene. So the Venom franchise, again, like Daredevil, that's something that I know frighteningly little about. In fact, my only point of reference for Venom as a character at all is Topher Grace's performance in Spider-Man 3, and I have been told by one of my friends who's a diehard Venom fan that that is the worst way to know Venom. So I haven't seen the Tom Hardy films, but I know who Tom Hardy is, so I was happy to see him in the mid-credit scene. But what was really cool is just at the end of that mid-credit scene, he left behind just that little, ink blot, the symbiote, the alien thing that I think turns into Venom. I don't know the mythology. Again, casual Marvel fan. What was cool about that, though, is that that was just planting the seed, almost literally, if you will, to give us an MCU Venom. Because yes, Tom Hardy disappeared and went back to his cinematic universe, whatever that may be. But now, we can have an MCU Venom. And it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. I also thought it was kind of nice that we had a little bit of a presence of Venom in the film at all, because in the bulk of the movie, we're really only seeing Spider-Man fight 5 villains, and I know enough about Spider-Man to know the Sinister Six is a thing. So even just having Venom in the film at all, to me, it kind of completes it, so that we had 6 sinister people showing their faces. Number 7. Okay. There's nothing extra special about this by any means, but I thought it was a very nice nod to the Toby Maguire franchise to end the film with Peter getting his own place, and then we don't see the landlord, but we just hear him say, "Rent is due on the 1st of the month, don't be late." Just having that word, rent, combined with the fact that the lock and the overall aesthetic of Peter's new apartment is very similar to the one that we saw Toby living in the Toby Maguire franchise, again, like Willem Defoe saying, I'm something of a scientist myself, Toby's landlord from the Sam Raimi franchise has worked his way into meme culture with the whole "give me rent" and
"you'll get your rent when you fix this damn door."
It was just a very nice, subtle nod to that character and that setting without being too over the top about it, and I appreciated that. Number 6, Jamie Foxx as Electro telling Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, "I thought you'd be black." This was a cool moment. for a couple of reasons. I think the most obvious one, and definitely it was the most obvious to the people sitting behind me in the theater because they were talkers, like very loud talkers. As soon as he said that, they said, "Oh, Miles Morales." And I think it was an obvious reference to Miles Morales, the character from Into the Spider-Verse, and I think he has a big presence in the comics. Again, I'm a very casual Marvel fan. But what I thought was extra exciting about that was going back to the legacy of the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. Because if you didn't know, when they announced that they were going to reboot the Spider-Man franchise, there was a massive internet movement to get Donald Glover from Community to be cast as Spider-Man. Now, of course, the role eventually went to Andrew Garfield, but as far as I know, Donald Glover did campaign for the role. I think he might have even auditioned for it. That's actually why he wore a Spider-Man shirt in, I think it was the first episode of season 2 of Community, because that was, I believe, right after it was announced that Andrew Garfield was cast. So that was just like a nice little nod to all of these people who wanted to see him in the role. And of course, Donald Glover ended up appearing in Spider-Man Homecoming. What was extra special about his character in Spider-Man Homecoming is that he was playing Miles Morales' uncle. So we know that Miles Morales does exist in the MCU. And I think it's really just a matter of time before we eventually see him. But just that one little exchange was so cool as a call out to the legacy of the Spider-Man fandom. Just Jamie Foxx saying to Andrew Garfield, "I thought you'd be black." Call out to Donald Glover, who was up for the Spider-Man role that eventually went to Andrew Garfield. Double call out to the character of Miles Morales, who in the MCU, Donald Glover plays the uncle of. It's just one little exchange has all of that Spider-Man legacy attached to it. That's why I love this movie. Number 5, the Spider-Man pointing meme. This movie is so aware of Spider-Man's role in internet meme culture. So of course there's the famous meme with the 3 Spider-Mans pointing at each other, and I remember in all the build-up with everyone speculating whether or not we were going to see Andrew Garfield and Toby Maguire, the general consensus was if they weren't introduced in the film with a recreation of that meme, then something was wrong. Needless to say, both of those actors did end up being in the film, which I loved, but they weren't introduced with the meme. And just given the context of the film, narratively, I'm so glad that they didn't go for that cheap gimmick. And that goes back to what I was saying before. The MCU definitely has a gimmick factor to it, but they don't go for that. They're always prioritizing story. So it wouldn't have made sense for the 3 Spider-Men to meet for the first time in an alleyway, perfectly recreating that moment. But they layered it in when they could. So of course, when Ned is trying to get Peter's attention, all 3 of them are looking at him like, yes? No, I mean Peter Parker. Well, we're all Peter Parker. And just in that little moment, we still got the visual of the 3 Spider-Men in a triangle, pointing at one another with general confusion. So yes, they gave us what we wanted, very subtly, and it wasn't at the expense of the story, but it fed into the fandom. Again, that's why I love this movie. Number 4, Toby's webs. The conversation that goes down between the 3 Spider-Men with Andrew and Tom asking Toby, "Wait, how are your webs biological? We have to make ours in a lab." I thought it was so cool and long overdue to have that acknowledged. The Toby Maguire Spider-Man movie was really my first exposure to Spider-Man, not having been into comics as a kid, so I just always assumed that the webs were part of the biological transformation of Peter Parker into Spider-Man. And then afterwards I found out that it was more comic accurate for them to be a man-made device. And I just want to say that it makes a lot more sense for the webs to be biological. Spiders making webs, I think that's their number 1 biological trait. So, I mean, all due respect to Stan Lee and the creators at Marvel who gave us Spider-Man, but I think Sam Raimi made a smart choice. So it was just really nice having that conversation acknowledged that yes, there is one Spider-Man who can make his own webs biologically, and as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of the superior one. Number 3, Toby Maguire Spider-Man telling Andrew Garfield Spider-Man that he's amazing. I mean, out of all the cheap gimmicks in the film, I think that one had to be the cheapest, but it also had to be one of my favorites. Because obviously, Andrew Garfield's franchise was called The Amazing Spider-Man, to differentiate him from Toby's movie franchise, which was just Spider-Man, Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3. So just him looking at him in the eye, saying, "You're amazing," multiple times. I was like, yes, we get it. But also it's hilarious. Number 2, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man saving MJ from falling to her death in an almost exact recreation of Gwen Stacy's death scene from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the only Spider-Man film I have not seen. And I think it's largely because I know what happens. I know that Gwen Stacy dies. I know how she dies. And I just thought that was too tragic for me to be able to handle watching. So I haven't seen the movie, but I know what happens. And just the emotional impact of him being able to save MJ in this universe was so beautiful. Because I think it speaks to the movie's theme again about second chances. It's not just about giving a second chance to the villains, it's also about bringing in the other two Spider-Men and allowing them a second chance to, start to heal from their own trauma that we witness in their respective films. So Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is still haunted by how he wasn't able to save Gwen Stacy, and in this movie, he takes an action where he can be the hero, and even though he can't change how things went for him, he can make things better for alternate Peter, for another side of himself. And we saw almost the exact same thing with Toby Maguire's Spider-Man, because he's constantly haunted by the fact that he had a hand in the death of the guy who he thought killed Uncle Ben. So then, when he sees Tom Holland's Spider-Man about to commit literal murder fueled by rage, the same path that he went down, he's able to stop that. It's showing us how trauma affects everyone, even superheroes, and I guess speaks to the heroic qualities of both respective characters. That they're able to learn from their past mistakes, they're able to forgive themselves, and then use those lessons to help other people. I thought that was brilliant. And that's why having them in this film was so much more than just a cheap gimmick. It had so much power. And I loved this movie so much. Okay, moving on to number 1. And finally, number 1, Aunt May saying, "With great power, there must also come great responsibility." I was not expecting this. I was not prepared for this in so many ways. Anytime there's a Spider-Man movie or Spider-Man retelling, like Uncle Ben dying and Peter getting that piece of advice, that typically comes right at the beginning. So I had just made peace with the fact that we were never going to hear that line spoken to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And having that piece of advice come in the third film, even though it was unexpected, looking back, it puts Tom Holland's Spider-Man story into complete perspective. Because what we've been seeing in the past 3 films was his coming-of-age story. Because the way that No Way Home ends, it's giving us the Spider-Man, the web-slinging superhero that we already know from the comics. And the thing that's beautiful about the MCU's Spider-Man films is that they really took the time to show us the journey of him growing up to not just have the powers, but to accept the responsibility that comes with them. And the thing that's really cool is how they adjusted the line. Now, according to my labor-intensive Wikipedia research, the line that Marisa Tomei speaks just as Aunt May is dying is more comic accurate, and it is, "With great power, there must also come great responsibility." Like so many other people, I just thought the line was what was said in the Sam Raimi film, which is, "With great power comes great responsibility." And it's a very subtle shift, but it makes a world of difference. Because with great power comes great responsibility, that's just almost implying that if you all of a sudden become powerful, then you all of a sudden become responsible. It's not talking about the obligation between the two. When you say with great power, there must also come great responsibility, I think that's the heart of the message. By saying there must also, that is where you're communicating to the person that yes, you have all of this great power, but you need to handle it responsibly. You have an obligation to use it for good. I didn't realize it, but I like the line so much better that way. So, there it is. My very scattered thoughts on why I loved Spider-Man No Way Home, and specifically why I loved all of these little Easter eggs and all of these little callbacks and nods to the previous Spider-Man films. It plays into why I keep going back to the MCU and why I love this franchise so much. Because they are allowing themselves the time to develop these beautiful characters. And I'm just that much more invested in seeing their stories play out. And I think it was the perfect way to conclude the Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. Anyway, friends, those are my thoughts. And this concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. So let me know in the comment section down below, what did you think of Spider-Man No Way Home, and what was your favorite Easter egg and or fan service moment? And if you want to be the first to know when I release more videos about movies, Shakespeare, Disney, cats, sometimes Funko Pops, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. If you haven't subscribed already, it is so easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me again today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the tea cup for one. Go away.